All right, so I entitled this lecture, Dreams Deferred from Delayed Equity. It's a lecture honoring Juneteenth. I have no disclosures, no financial relationships with ineligible entities ever. And the learning objectives for this presentation, first is to understand the origins of Juneteenth and its current relevance in equity work. The second is to be able to contrast the racial demographics of the current physician workforce to those of the general US population. And the third is to list 3 changes we all can make in our workplace to increase exposure for those that are underrepresented in medicine. Outline, I'm just going to start with the origins of the holiday and then go do a brief history from Juneteenth to present day America, and then start with the overview of the current physician workforce, then segue into pathology as a subspecialty. And then I want to talk about work we can be doing, steps, very practical things we can do to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then some concluding remarks and hopefully some questions and comments at the end. All right, so what is Juneteenth? So the election of 1860, this happened in November on the 6th day. It's probably our nation's most pivotal election. So there were 4 candidates. There was John Breckinridge. He was the Democrat. He was not only supportive of slavery, but he wanted expansion of slavery. There was Abraham Lincoln, who we all know, who personally opposed slavery, but actually thought it should be better left to the states to decide what happens. The Democrat was Stephen Douglas, who opposed slavery in the newly acquired territories, and then John Bell, who just avoided the whole issue altogether. The political alignment we see stemming from this election, we see in present day politics in America. And as we know, Lincoln swept the North. Breckinridge took the South, but because he split votes with Bell, neither one of them were in the running until Lincoln won. However, literally on the order of days, our nation began to fall apart. So 2 days after the election, there were 2 South Carolina senators, and they instantly resigned. And then in December of 1860, and in a unanimous vote, South Carolina, their legislature dissolved their union with the United States. By February, there were a total of 11 states, known as the Confederacy, or the Confederate States of America, who completely receded from what's now called the Union, and those were the remaining states of the North, and then California and Oregon. So this started then the American Civil War. It was the North versus the South, or the Union versus the Confederacy. And it really centered not only on the issue of slavery, but what the Southern states, the Confederacy, was pushing. They wanted expansion into all the territory that was newly acquired, both in the Louisiana Purchase and through the Mexican-American War, which essentially was most of the land west of the Mississippi River, which is a huge part of our current day continental US. At the time, there were about 32 million Americans. Of those, 13% or 4 million were Blacks, and almost all of those were enslaved Blacks living in the South. So highly concentrated in the South. Then came the Proclamation, Proclamation 95, also known as our Emancipation Proclamation. So on January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued this. And this came, what they thought at the outset of the Civil War, they thought it would be a 2-week quick war between the North and the South. What it actually became were years of bloody war, lost lives. And there were many people that saw slavery as the key issue here. There were abolitionists that always wanted slavery to be abolished. But then what the North was realizing was, as they were conquering the South in different cities and different forts, when the South fell, those slaves were freed. That weakened the workforce of the South, and that was actually a strategic advantage for them. So in this proclamation, slaves of the South of the Confederacy were declared free on this date, January 1st, 1863. But really, if you were a slave, say you were a slave in Alabama, the only way you were going to give your freedom were 1 or 2 ways. One, you were going to escape, somehow survive running up to the closest Union border, or you were waiting for the Union soldiers to come, win a battle, and then you were freed. So really, as the war advanced and the North won, they were freeing slaves. So it was the expansion of freedom. And in this proclamation, they also allowed these recently freed slaves to enlist in the Union forces and then help free their own people. And so this was big. So they were growing their Union numbers with every single battle, and that's how the North won. Interestingly enough, there are a lot of different origins for Memorial Day in the United States. A lot of them date back to this time. One in specific was on May 1st of 1865 in Charleston, South Carolina. And what had happened here is previously a lot of people had been captured in the South by the Confederacy. A lot of slaves, a lot of people fighting for the North, and basically died sepsis infection, and they just buried them unceremoniously in a mass grave. Well, when the North won and the war was over, freed slaves came, they dug up the bodies, they gave them proper burials, they had different parades, picnics, everything we think of Memorial today. And this happened around the country, but this is one example. So Juneteenth happened at the end of the Civil War on June 19th, 1865. And what happened was there were about 2,000 plus federal soldiers, Union soldiers, and they arrived in Galveston, Texas. And basically they marched around Galveston reading and informing all Texans that the accordance with the proclamation that had been previously issued, every slave was free. And this actually marks in our history when everybody was free. If we remember July 4th, 1776, that's when the nation declared their freedom, but not until this day were all free, but only sort of. So this is actually the proclamation that was read. And you can see I underlined what I thought was an interesting phrase. The freedmen were advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. Now you can imagine, these were, they were living on their master's territory, people that had torn their family apart, raped them, beat them, and they were told to basically stay put and be quiet. So freedom from slavery, sure, but is that really a free life? No. Is that an equal life? No. And additionally, slavery actually still continued after this day in history. So in December of the same year, we did have the 13th Amendment ratified. And this declared officially slavery and involuntary solitude unconstitutional, unless it's a punishment for a crime. And actually, a lot of our prison systems kind of originated on this, right? People would be charged with a crime and then committed to slavery yet again. Almost immediately after the 13th Amendment, the Ku Klux Klan was formed on the order of days later by 6 Confederate veterans in Tennessee. And then it was a lot of people who had fought in the war on the side of the Confederacy came together and formed the Ku Klux Klan. Also, I don't think a lot of people know this. A lot of indigenous people actually had slaves as well. They were called the 5 civilized tribes, referring to the Cherokee, Choctaw, Cree, Chickasaw, and Seminole. I'm actually part Seminole from this. But basically, there are 5 tribes that basically, when the settlers came over, they adopted more of their customs, including slavery. And the reason they sided with the Confederacy is because the Confederacy told them if they won on the basis of slavery, they could keep their lands with their slaves. So kind of bought them out. However, the following year, 1866, there were treaties signed, and that's actually when slavery ended in America, if for completion. All right, so that's an overview of Juneteenth. So where do we go from here? How do we get from Juneteenth to 2022? We start with the Jim Crow era, which started at the end of the Civil War and continued to 1968. So Jim Crow is a Black minstrel character, which was really racist entertainment with white traveling musicians in blackface, depicted Blacks as lazy, stupid, happy-go-lucky. And basically what Jim Crow laws were, they were state and local statutes. They legalized racial segregation. It really began in the South, but spread all over the US. As you can see, a lot of the Confederate soldiers actually went on to become law enforcement agents, judges. So everything was very biased against these newly freed Blacks in America. Jim Crow laws marginalized African Americans by denying them the right to vote, hold jobs, get an education, have the same access to healthcare, food as other people in America. And then those that defied the laws were punished with arrests, fines, jails, violence, and even deaths. In Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, it's a landmark case. So in 1890, down in Louisiana, they passed the Jim Crow law that segregated their rail cars or their trains. Homer Plessy, excuse me, he was 7/8 white, 1/8 Black, but he was opposed to sitting in the back and was arrested. He sued the state. He found a lawyer who helped him sue the state and said this wasn't right because separate but equal violates his constitutional right to equality and equal protection under the 14th Amendment. However, the judge in this case, Judge Ferguson, ruled against him. And then this went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they actually sided with the judge, just therefore allowing state-sponsored segregation. And from there on, we had segregation everywhere. We had segregation. This is an example of our schools. We have elementary schools on the left. On the right is Meharry Medical College, and this is a picture below of Harvard University's medical center. And you can see the classes are segregated. Overlapping with the Jim Crow era is the American Civil Rights Movement, which started in 1954 and also estimated to end around 1968. So 1954 is an exciting year in history. We had President Eisenhower, Vice President Nixon, the school board, or the board versus the Brown versus the Board of Education ruled that segregation was unconstitutional. So supposedly our schools should be integrated. Interestingly enough, I went to residency down in New Orleans, and that's when we had our first graduating class of residents in pathology. It's also a year 2 special Black women were born. The first is little Ruby Bridges. She is well known for, at the age of 6, being the first child in America to integrate the school system, and this is down in New Orleans. Basically, her parents responded to a request by the NAACP for voluntary integration of the New Orleans school system. At the time, New Orleans was the 2nd largest city in America. A lot of people don't know it was the epicenter of the slave trade for about half the slave trade history in America, or the Americas. And only the schools implemented a entrance exam with the hopes of weeding out a lot of Black children. So they said, oh, you can integrate, but you have to pass this test. Only 6 Black children passed the test, and only 4 had parents that were okay with them trying to integrate. And Ruby Bridges was the first. And interestingly enough, as soon as Bridges entered, a lot of white parents withdrew their kids from school. Her parents were harassed, and only one teacher agreed to teach her, and they taught one-on-one for over a year. The second is my mom. She was born in 1954. She was born in a little town called Inkster, Michigan. Actually, at the time of her birth, it wasn't even a city. It was a village. It was basically the all-Black suburb of Detroit, right next to the Ford factory, where the men in my family worked. Very low income. The Blacks were newly arrived from the South, from sharecropping, moved up for a better life. They were doing the same job as their white coworkers, making about a quarter of the money to do the same job. The houses that the Ford family built for these Black families were essentially made out of cardboard. A lot of health issues. But of course, the white factory workers didn't want them living in the same space. My mom actually had very little interaction with white people growing up, with exception of going shopping every now and then for new clothes. And she would only speak of stories of harassment. She lived a relatively sheltered life, I'd say. Never really left home, never really went out of the town. She did go to college at a state school, or started, and withdrew. So despite doing well in school, despite getting all A's, she went to one of the state schools and was so far behind she couldn't keep up. She told me a lot of stories of harassment by her colleagues, by her roommates. And so she withdrew. She did well, we did well, but it was fairly traumatic. And it's a story that really hasn't changed too much if we look at our schools. So the civil rights era, we all know all these marches for freedom, all these marches for equality. Martin Luther King, we can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. Things we still see today on the news, same stories. We jump forward to my high school and college and post-college education. I went to high school, so I'm from New Jersey. I was born in New Jersey. I went to a school, a little over 2,000 people. A little under half of those students were on free lunch. About 88% of our school district were minority. A majority of that was Black or Hispanic. And I did well in school. I did all the sports, all the academics, all the arts, and yet still, my guidance counselor discouraged me from applying to any big name school or going out of state. Fortunately, for two things, I had my mother, who was basically like, ignore him. But I also had a med school down the street. So Robert Wood Johnson, now known as New Jersey Medical School, they had a mini med school program. And what they did is they reached out to local high schools that were predominantly minority, and they reached out to guidance counselors and principals, and they asked them, who do you see potentially becoming a doctor or doing something in healthcare? And so we had, once a week after school, we would go down the street and just basically have these free interactive sessions where we learn about the body, learn about surgery, learn about all different things. And if not for that program, I'm pretty sure I would not be here because medicine was not on my radar. In college, I went down to Duke for college. About 10% of our student body was Black, which is fairly good in America. And I started pre-med. And again, I did very well in school, but like my mother, like a lot of my classmates that were Black, there was a huge gap still between the level taught in my high school and the level taught at Duke. A lot of my peers came from the top, private schools, boarding schools. Tons of discouragement from advisors for like getting an A-. And then like my mom, I had a lot of harassment. And not just me, a lot of people that looked like me, both inside the classroom, outside the classroom. And I bring this to attention. This is a hashtag. I don't know how many people here are on Twitter, but during the pandemic, this is a hashtag that got a lot of attention. It's called Black in the Ivory. And it was started by two Black females that are academics. And basically it gave them a space to kind of get off their chest a lot of the harassment they were enduring in different spaces. And people chimed in from all over the world on different experiences they had because of their skin color in these higher educational places. So one woman, this postdoc, someone else trying to snatch her wig off so they could see what's underneath. This other woman, and a lot of us have had this difficulty just getting into your own building, your own lab, and being, pulled aside, forced to show identification while your classmates in. Myself, accused of stealing one of our transcriptionist jewelry. She found it later. She had accused me and the entire cleaning crew, all Black people. No repercussions for her. Could have ended my career. And these are things many people face. During their training. Okay. And unfortunately, these are all articles taken from 2020 or sooner. Our schools are very segregated in America. They've been segregated since their inception. This is from, two of these are from NPR. One is from an Economic Policy Institute, and New York Times headlines the public school system in New York City. I grew up not far from there. They are a very segregated school system. And honestly, some parents are fighting to keep them segregated. People want, am I echoing somehow? Oh, okay. The segregation persists. And in one of these articles, they outline a pretty staggering number that predominantly white school districts in America collectively get $23 billion more per year than predominantly non-white schools, which translate for every student enrolled, the average non-white school district receives $2,200 less than a white school district. That's a lot, and it helps explain that gap we see when so many people come from minority schools, and then they go to college and there's a gap. it really helps explain that. Translating this to medicine, this is from the AMC. They've done a lot of analysis. They're trying to work on diversifying medicine and addressing the root causes. And so one of them, they're just looking, and you can see these two charts. On the left are the fathers, on the right is the mothers. And you can see African Americans, the red lines, and then Hispanics, the green, far below those of other races in America. So I went to Duke. I dropped pre-med, did fine in my classes. I was a psych major. I thought people were fascinating. And I was really torn with whether I wanted to be a doctor. You know, I loved science. I loved helping people. I loved the body. I love anatomy, but I really did not like my pre-med peers. A lot of them, they were just so terrible and self-serving. And I thought it was so hypocritical to try to enter this profession that you're supposed to be a service to others. So I took time off. I did things a little out of order. I took the MCAT before finishing my pre-med recs, and I figured if I did well enough, then I'd go back and finish them. So that's what I did. Did well on the MCATs. I went close to home. I went to Penn's post-bac program to finish the rest of my pre-med recs. I worked about 5 part-time jobs across 2 states during that time. I basically lived on a nap schedule for about 2 years. And I applied twice. I did not, like many people, get in the first time. I had no idea what I was doing. I remember I went to Barnes & Noble, purchased one of those US News Report books, and literally read through the whole thing, made my whole own little Excel sheet of every med school in America, and just went off of that. And also financially restricted. As we all know, it costs a lot of money. And a lot of people from these backgrounds do not have the money to apply broadly and widely. But I did get in, and I went down to New Orleans, and I went to Tulane. This was post-Katrina era. So this was about 5 years post-Katrina. It was a period of rebuilding in the city. I was very excited. Tulane not only had a dual degree program, a dual MD and PH program. You can earn both in 4 years. They were very, very committed to community building, and they had a community service requirement. They also bragged about their diversity. And this was on our welcoming page, and the name that is redacted is actually a friend of mine, but they bragged about people going to Tulane for generations. And mind you, at the time, New Orleans was 60% Black. And then I was very surprised to find that for the next decade, oh goodness. Uh-oh. I guess. So Zoom is fine? Well. Sorry, people on Zoom, we're having technical difficulties in person. Uh-oh. I don't know. Okay, I'm just going to keep talking for those on Zoom. But basically for the next decade, I would be either the only Black student or trainee in the room or a class, or one of very few. So in med school, we had a class of 188 students. There were 3 Black students, all 3 Black females, and they really could not keep us straight, but despite us not looking like each other. I actually started in general surgery. Our year was the first class of Black females. And then I switched to pathology, where I was the first Black female graduate in a program that had their first graduating class the year of my mother's birth. So in that time, they had not one Black female, and the one Black male was in the class before me. And it was hard. It's very hard being in these spaces when you are the only one of hundreds of people, oh, there we go, that look like you. It's at times depressing, anxiety, even if people maybe treat you right, they're mind games that go on in your own mind. And it's something I really would not wish upon anyone. And unfortunately, there are a lot of programs and spaces where that is the norm. And then after residency, I went on to New Mexico. I did my fellowship in forensics at the Office of the Medical Investigator. And what I found interesting, I was very apprehensive about going there. You know, after a decade, you kind of don't want to be the only one. And they had only had a few Black graduates, and the state of New Mexico only has about 2% of the population is Black. However, I had a markedly different experience here. It is the first time and one of few times, you know, all the faculty took the time to learn our names, learn our interests, and everyone, not just the people that looked like them. It just opened up such a world within me where I was not afraid to make mistakes. I wasn't afraid to ask questions, and I really excelled and grew. And it came down to two things. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. So one, every single person was treated with the same high level of respect, and all opportunities were presented to all trainees. And in so much of my training in the decade prior, what I saw happen time and time and time again are these backdoor opportunities, not necessarily even to the hardest working, but to someone's that's related to someone in the department or the school, or someone that looks like someone, or some connection that I and a lot of people like myself never had. And it really is sometimes that simple. So where are we now in terms of the current physician workforce? Let's start with medicine. So the AMC they used to call the demographic underrepresented minorities. Now it's underrepresented in medicine, and it includes currently Black individuals, Hispanic individuals, and Native Americans. And that's inclusive of your American Indians, Alaskan Natives, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders. And we find ourselves still grossly underrepresented in medical school and continuing on to the faculty level. So on the left, this is data pulled from the AMC's website. The most recent data they have is from 2018 to 2019. On the left is the US Census, and the most recent data is the same time period. And so if you compare, and the first one is for the medical student body, while those that are underrepresented in medicine comprise about a third of the current US population, they only comprise about 12% of the medical student body. If we go on to the physician workforce, it's about the same at 12.1%. And then when we go to the faculty level, it plummets to 4.6% compared to 1/3 of the general population. So why? Where is all this coming from? Why is it so bad? How many have heard of the Flexner report? Anybody? All right, so this is Abraham Flexner. He was an educator. He was commissioned by the AMA. Basically, he did a tour. He did a tour of the US and Canada. There were somewhere between 148, 155 schools at the time that were training physicians. And basically, he did a review, and that's his publication here, Medical Education in the United States and Canada. And he called for higher admission standards, higher graduation standards. And one of his relatives had trained at Johns Hopkins. And so he set the model of Johns Hopkins as the model medical school, 2 years basic science, 2 years clinical work. The plus of this is, you know, our training was more uniformed. We were more respected. We have more compensation as a result. However, it almost instantly closed a lot of institutions that did not have the resources to implement that change immediately. That includes schools that were alternative medicine, osteopathic medicine, rural schools. It also limited our training. Public health used to be more integrated. Business used to be more integrated. All those things we question, why don't we learn? A lot of that was cut out in favor of basic science and keeping it simple. It also closed most of the HBCUs, which served not only Black students, but a lot of poor white students and rural students as well. This is a list of the former HBCUs, or historically Black colleges and universities, their medical schools. You can see there was Howard University in Washington, D.C., Lincoln University, and a bunch. New Orleans had Straight University. And Flexner was racist. He thought that Black doctors should only treat Black patients. He claimed that Black people were a threat to the middle upper class whites, and he endorsed segregation. So he was not upset when these schools closed. And only recently has the AMA, on the order of a few years, issued a formal apology for this. And only 2 of these schools remain to this day: Howard University in Washington, D.C., and Meharry Medical College in Nashville. So meanwhile, nothing changed in terms of admission of Black students to these other institutions for the next 50 years. Over 80% of the Black doctors during this time received their training at either Meharry or Howard. At this time, Black doctors comprise about 2.5% of the US workforce or so. So how is pathology doing? This is an article I've read several times. It's by Dr. Marissa White et al. It's entitled Current and Historical Trends in Diversity by Race, Ethnicity, and Sex Within the US Pathology Physician Workforce. And the work is centered in Johns Hopkins as well. And so they studied not only our workforce in terms of sex, but also race, the faculty level and resident level. And you can see the findings. Since 1995, in this, on the left, the residents they studied from 1995 on, you can see the bottom 3 lines are Hispanic, Black, and then Indigenous populations. And there's really no statistically significant difference for any of those populations. And the same holds back for faculty. And the faculty data go all the way back to 1970. Not one significant change has been made since 1970, and we're in 2022. This is from the same paper, and they compare the US Census to med school graduates, applicants to pathology, and all the way down to the faculty level. And you can just see by the time you get to the faculty level, how few there are of anybody that's considered underrepresented in medicine. And the question is not only how do we get more people into medicine and into pathology, but how do we retain people? Where are people going from this jump from the residency column down to the faculty column? Why are we losing them? How do we get them back? Things to think about. And so those are all percentages, and I also like to compare to absolute numbers. And so this is also from the AMC. This is from 2019, their survey, which is 2018 data. And you can see it's a little small there, but the top are females by race and the bottom's male. There are only about 300 or so Black pathologists in America practicing, maybe. So absolute number is very low. Imagine dividing that between 50 states, one of which is California, which is huge. That's not a lot of people. And if you were to detract Howard and Meharry, you're probably losing a significant number of people. So there aren't a lot of us. So where do we go from here? The road to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Malcolm X. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6, there's no progress. If you pull it out all the way, that's not progress. Progress is healing the wound that the blow made, and they haven't even pulled the knife out, much less healed the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there. I do think, not the people in the room, probably not the people listening to this lecture, but I think, there's a division in America, and a lot of people don't even admit harm has been done, lasting harm and trauma. And so there are many depictions of justice, equity, equality. This is one of my favorite ones. Where there's 3 people, they're watching a game, and the reality is, one person is getting more than they need to see the game. One is getting probably just enough, and one's not getting nearly enough. Equality is giving everyone the same step stool to help them see, which is going to help someone see better, help someone just see, and still someone can't see. Equity, maybe you don't give one anything because they can already see. And you adjust so everyone can see. And then justice, that fence is gone. This is not even an issue about giving things. Another way it's been put to me, so when I was in New Orleans, I participated in a program, and they taught us about racial equity and diversity and all the issues in New Orleans, which are many. They give this analogy of playing a game of Monopoly. And imagine you have one group of people and they play the game, they go around 20 times. They collect all the property, they own everything, and then you let the other people play. How well is that second group gonna do? And that's a lot of populations in America, not just the Black population, many minoritized populations. And so it is not a level playing field. So in response to the article by Dr. White et al., I co-authored a response editorial with Dr. Samdi, Ellis, Reynolds, and Upton. And it was a response to that, and it kind of outlined the crisis, but we gave a lot of different, very practical implications we can do. So the first, start with, basic implicit bias training. We need to embrace that we all have biases. And I think UW does this well. King County, who's my primary employer, or my only employer, does that as well. But I don't know who's listening, but it's an excellent place to start. And the idea is we all have biases, and it's learning to address them, recognize them, and do better. And how do we mitigate them? And there are some resources. The AAMC has some. I did the Franklin Covey. It's a 60-minute course. I did that when I was on our child death review committee. They have us do one every single time we do interviews at our office, just to remind us and refresh ourselves the many different biases that do exist. All right, so outreach is the second one. And normally I try to put in a plug to reach out to your local HBCUs, because there are 107 HBCUs in America. That's almost, I think, 250,000 Black students. Only 4 have med schools, and only 2 have departments of pathology. And so I usually encourage people to reach out to them, but as you can see, there are none in this area of the country. So what can we do? Well, there are local chapters of minority affinity groups. UW has a minority association of pre-health students, also SNMA and LAMSA, the Black and Latino student bodies. Reach out to them, they're always trying to put on community programming and workshops. We should be there with them. We should be there to support them. Ask if there's anything we can do to help. Offer rotations in the laboratory. So Johns Hopkins provides a free 6-week summer program. And it targets minorities, and it puts them on rotations through the lab. They give a travel stipend, they get lodging stipends, because remember, a lot of these populations, they cannot afford to spend a summer off not working, and we should not put that financial burden on them. Also, we need to infiltrate any early educational exposure programs. I'd say I think pathology has a lot of work to do for recruitment in general. A lot of these programs, like the one I went to, it was very heavy on surgery, and surgeons were there. And I really think anywhere surgery has a space, pathology has a space. We know the body just as well, I'd argue, if not better, especially if you're an anatomic pathologist. We're inherently teachers, we teach all the time. And so I think if there's any type of early education immersion program, we should be in there right alongside any other specialty. Continue to invite diverse speakers. We need to intentionally be more inclusive, make room for those who have been historically excluded. And there are all these different organizations you can reach out to. The NMA, that's the Black Professional Group. LAMSA again, there's an American Indian Physicians Group as well. And then the new release of our Society of Black Pathologists. And we're working on being able to, if you have somebody you want to do a GI lecture for or something, we can put you in contact with. Also, something I've noticed in pathology or medicine in general, sometimes there seems to be a go-to person for a certain topic or conversation. And consider if you're that go-to person, maybe every 5th or 10th request, defer to someone else and say, I'm busy, but I'd recommend this person to take my place, and give them that opportunity for advancement. Mentoring and sponsorship. So get comfortable with people you're not instinctively comfortable with, especially if you're the leader of the group or in any type of leadership position. Create a safe space for all and let everybody have a voice heard. So much during my training, it's been being talked over by other people and not listened to. And you notice the trends of whose voices are listening to and who are not. So really try to be mindful. And also recognize that at times some people in these demographics might be shyer and not more forward in their speech because they're used to being talked over, because they're used to being hurt, and they might not come beaming into your classroom or your workspace. And there's this big movement right now, this he for she, and we need that same energy somehow translated into these diversity efforts. You know, no more panels, but we should probably no longer have panels that don't include diverse demographics in multiple ways. And then what I think is interesting is assessing and adjusting admissions practices. So specific to pathology, we need to look at every application that comes from somebody underrepresented in medicine. Historically, we know we're a specialty that typically goes unfilled. Yet there's every year there are underrepresented minorities that don't match into pathology. So I think we need to take honest looks why we're turning anyone away. I was listening to an episode, one of my friends and colleagues started a podcast called Diversify and Path. And he basically interviews a bunch of people across the nation, across the world actually, with different trajectories of their career, different diversity. So it's everything from ethnic, disability status or ability status, LGBTQIA, you name it. And he interviewed Dr. Eddie Lee, who's at UPenn. And he talked about at UPenn, they adjust their admissions practices. And so now they group all the minority applications together and look at them at the pool. They evaluate them on the same criteria, but he said it really helps somehow kind of highlight this group's struggle when they look at them together as a group. I thought that was an interesting idea. Another thing I've seen in medicine is this people holding spots for people they know or somebody's relative, and it really just shouldn't be done at baseline in practice, but imagine it makes it almost impossible for those from any demographic that don't have connections to get their foot in the door if you're always holding a space for someone else. And so what is justice? I think actually, you know, the tearing down of the fence, a lot of that is beyond us, but there are national groups that are committed to these things for reform of our educational system, housing policies, healthcare access. And so if you are the type to donate or support financially, think about, you know, picking one of these groups to support. But it's beyond us, but I do think there's power in numbers. I think, you know, when you put on a white coat, there is a certain amount of respect that is garnered and people listen, for better or for worse, a little more when a doctor speaks on something. So while a lot of this is bigger than us, I do think if we speak up in numbers, it is helpful. So some concluding remarks, allyship and advocacy. So equity is only achieved with help from the majority. That is a proven trend in history. So be a Barbara Henry. Barbara Henry, the white teacher that decided she would make the sacrifice and teach all year with this little Black girl to help her acclimate to the school that did not want her. Be a John F. Kennedy. It took him a long time to come around actually and to address the civil rights movement as important to America and important enough for him to take a public stance on. And he's the one that enacted the Civil Rights Amendment. And then the abolitionists, they were the ones back in the days of slavery pushing it for it to be abolished, and they did not give up. And if the Civil War had gone differently, if we didn't have them there whispering into Lincoln's ear to do the right thing, that this was important, if the South had won, our country would have been different. I think most of us probably wouldn't even be in this room. So be that type of person. We need in DEI people that are willing to take risks, stick their necks out, go against the grain and the status quo. And then lastly, commemorating this holiday, Juneteenth. So just as the Declaration of Freedom for Slaves did not equate to instant freedom, declaring an institution to be diverse, equitable, inclusive really doesn't mean anything unless you're putting in work and action and we're seeing results. It requires force to obtain freedom. It took years of bloodshed. It took former slaves becoming empowered. And then they were empowered to join the Union Army and free their own. So we have to create space for others to do the work too. And I think sometimes that gets overworked when people get excited about things to remember to listen to others' voices. And then recognize and celebrate those who have sacrificed for the freedom of others. There have been people doing the work, recognize them. I've seen this online and different people. And there have historically been people doing the work of diversity, inclusion, equity, of studying disparities. And now all of a sudden it's a hot topic. Don't overlook those people that have already been doing the work. Reach out to them, acknowledge the work they have already put in. All right, and that is it. Thank you. This is the final slide to check in, submit an evaluation, etc. I would like to hear more of Dr. Jackson's observations on public health challenges she encounters in practice as a forensic pathologist as they pertain to racism and historic inequities in housing, access to education, and opportunities. And that is, I believe, from Dr. Melissa Upton. Dr. Upton, thank you for joining. Observations on public health challenges. Oh goodness, that's about everything we do. For those of you that don't know, the King County Medical Examiner's Office is centered within the Department of Public Health here in King County. I would argue everything we do is reflective of some type of public health challenge. In terms of historic inequities in housing, a large percent of our cases are in either unhoused populations or those with Housing Insecurity Act. Access to education and opportunities. Challenges. I wish this was in person so I could ask a follow-up to the question. Observations on public health challenges. You see the disparities. Done. Okay, so I will answer this one question because we are out of time. But you see the disparities in all that we do. You see those that are minoritized populations in the US overrepresented in our decedents, whether that's Black, Latino, Indigenous, female identified people, member of the LGBTQIA community, disabled, whether that's neglect, whether that's abuse, whether that's substance use that is fatal. And there are reasons these populations account for more deaths than they are in the general population. I don't know if that answers your question, and I don't fully know how to answer that question in the amount of time I have, but we do see that. Okay, it does answer her question. All right, and we have to go because other people are walking in, but thank you, everyone. And feel free to send me any emails or actually just if you're on Twitter, Nicole Jackson, MD, if you have any questions. Thank you.